ADCT World News, and now Inside Prime with me, Vanshika Agarwal. Learn economics with IMF experts on economic growth. Special report on migratory birds changes due to environmental impact. But first we start with global headlines.
シンボル的なものもありますよね、桜というのはね。はい、ですから、その周りの環境、雰囲気もとても楽しく美しいし、はい、楽しくなりますね。
Very beautiful.
Very beautiful, yes.
The trees are awesome.
We got a bit of luck because cherry blossoms normally a little earlier.
Sakura is something that you can expect every year, but no one knows whether you can see it next year. We take it for granted we can see it next year again, but who knows? Something may happen. So we have to make it every year to make sure I'm here to have a time to enjoy.
Welcome to the Inside Prime with me, Vanshika Agarwal. What is economic growth? Why is it important and how is it measured? We answer these questions to economists. What is economic growth?
Value of all the goods and services that society produces. So, if we say the economy grew by X% in a year, we are looking at how much more goods, like bread and cars, and services like restaurant meals and hotel stays that an economy produces each year compared to last. To make this concrete, imagine an economy that only produces cars. In the first year, they produced 1,000 cars, while in the second year, they produced 1,050. The real GDP growth in the second year would then be 5%, the 50 extra cars. Growth can also be negative. If the economy produced 900 cars in the second year, you would have had a negative growth, a 10% decline.
Why does economic growth matter?
More jobs, higher incomes, and less poverty. It's not just you can buy more stuff. Growth can lead to bigger investments in businesses, stronger social protection, and more financial security for all citizens, all of which in turn can lead to better living standards. Small changes in economic growth can lead to massive changes in living standards over time. Let's consider countries A and B. Every year, country A grows by 1 percentage point faster than country B. In 70 years, the living standard in country A would be about twice that of country B. How is economic
growth measured?
changes in the gross domestic product, or GDP? So one way is to simply add all of the market values of all the goods and services produced in the economy in a year. That way, I can calculate something called the nominal GDP. If I see that nominal GDP is growing 10% year on year, well, that's useful. But if all the prices in the economy have increased by 10%, all I'm really seeing is inflation. This is why we also calculate something called real GDP, which means GDP adjusted for inflation. If the nominal GDP grows by 10% and inflation is around 5%, then real GDP growth is 5%. Now, it's important to point out, though, that GDP is not a measure of accumulated wealth. An economy can be poor, but it can have high rates of GDP growth. Also, GDP does not tell us anything about how welfare is distributed. The economy may have produced 1,000 cars, but they could have all been bought by one person, while the rest got nothing. Lastly, GDP does not reflect economic realities, such as environmental costs. For example, focusing on growth in the number of cars does not account for environmental damage associated with all of those extra cars.
What can government do to increase economic growth?
Do a variety of things to boost economic growth. For example, it can increase spending or lower taxes. Central banks can also lower interest rates to make it cheaper to borrow or invest, which can help boost spending in the short term. But all of this is far from simple, because higher government spending and lower taxes could also create unsustainable debts. And lower interest rates can lead to higher inflation. This could all lead to lower, not higher economic growth in the long run. Going back to our car economy, focusing on just producing more cars at all costs may not necessarily be the best economic strategy overall. To generate long-term, inclusive, and sustainable growth, governments need to go beyond short-term spending and focus on strengthening their institutions and consistently delivering basic services for their citizens, like education, health, and infrastructure. With all of these foundations, economic growth can then support inclusion by creating jobs, lifting living standards, and most importantly, ensuring opportunities for all. That's all we have.
This is the Inside Prem. You can subscribe our YouTube channel for more interesting stories. Now move on to the next story. Some countries restrict access to foreign currency and only selected people can buy them. The result, a parallel market emerges, unfairly benefiting people who are connected and can access the cheaper official exchange.
Liberalization. Well, it's simple. It means making foreign exchange available to everybody at the same exchange rate. In most countries, that isn't an issue. If I want to travel to Germany, here in the US, I just go to a bank and buy euros. And no questions asked, and the exchange rate is the same wherever I go. But in some countries, they restrict the access to foreign currency. Only select people can buy US dollars or euros, and only up to a certain limit and for certain transactions. What's the result? A parallel, a black market emerges. Those lucky enough to have foreign currency, like exporters, tourism operators, or people receiving remittances, they sell it at a premium to people who don't have access to the official market. And this parallel market rate can be twice as high as the official exchange rate. Now, this is a terrible system. It gives an unfair advantage to people who are connected and who have access to the cheaper official exchange rate. For example, if I can buy a kilo of rice at, say, 50, and everybody else has to pay 100, I can corner the market. More generally, it zaps the energy from the economy. Everybody has only one thing on their mind. How can I buy foreign currency cheaply and sell it more expensively? Exploit the arbitrage, as we say as economists. There's little incentive to invest, let alone in export-generating activities that have to surrender their foreign currency at the official exchange rate. Countries have had such systems, for example, the former Soviet Union or in some countries in Africa. They eventually all abandoned them. And this is why the IMF recommends abolishing such restrictions. After all, our mandate is to promote sustainable growth and prosperity. And by the way, the members of the IMF, all members, pledged to not impose restrictions on buying foreign currencies for so-called current transactions, by which we mean importing goods and services. So no wonder that the IMF opposes them. So what drives this black market or parallel market exchange rate? Well, unlike the official exchange rate, the parallel exchange rate is driven by market forces. The scarcer the foreign currency and tighter the restrictions, the bigger is the difference to the official exchange rate. If the central bank prints more domestic currency, demand in the parallel market goes up and the exchange rate weakens. But if there were a sudden inflow of foreign currency, the parallel market rate strengthens. Sometimes just the news of some possible inflow is enough to narrow the gap to the official exchange rate. So, you may ask, wouldn't foreign currency liberalization drive up the inflation? Not necessarily. In highly restricted systems, almost all consumer imports already happen at the more expensive parallel market exchange rate. So prices for imported goods may not change much once the restrictions are lifted. In fact, once the exchange rate is unified and truly market determined, it may well appreciate. Why? Because investments in exports will pick up and the supply of dollars and euros will increase. This will ultimately feed through to lower import prices and it will get the economy going again. Putting a lid on inflation, of course, depends on supporting policies. To fight inflation, the central bank should keep interest rates high and abstain from directly funding the budget deficit. And the government should keep a lid on spending. So the bottom line is this: removing foreign currency restrictions is critical for a healthier
Agatha, whose real name has been concealed, was among at least 250,000 women and girls who, according to UN figures, were raped by Hutu extremities during the genocide targeting the Tutsi minority in 1994. Raped and abducted by a former schoolmate during the 100 days of bloodshed that left 8 lakh people dead. Agatha was just 17 when she gave birth. Her daughter Agnes, whose real name has been concealed, was shunned by relatives on both sides. 30 years on, the relationship between mother and daughter is slowly healing.
icyo binzanira uburyo nabayeho muri jenoside, ibyo nahuye nabyo, mbese ubwo uko yatangiye n'uko yarangiye, kuko yatangiye ndi mu Rwanda isoza ndi mu Rwanda nta handi hantu nahungiye. Ubwo rero iyo mbigezemo nyine hari ikindi kintu video iza nka kwa kundi nyine uko byatangiye byose, ubwo nyine bikanzanira ikintu bita ihungabana. ntabwo bamukundaga, kuko hariho n'abavuga bati aba bana ni mubice mubakureho nibwo muzakomeza kuba mu muryango. Ariko kubwo umuntu uba warakuye mu nda ukumva utabishoboka, uvuga ati aho kugira nica umwana wanjye nakomeza nkahunga nkagenda nkakomeza nkabaho mu buzima nari ndiho, ariko umwana wanjye nabyaye namwishe. ku ruhande rwo kwa mama nitwaga interahamwe, ku ruhande rwo kwa papa bakanyita inzoka. Hagati aho ngaho nkumva ntazi icyo ndi cyo, kwa mama nkumva ndi igikomere kuri we, no kwa papa simbibonemo kubera amagambo nabibonye. Umutima ntabwo niyumvaga, numvaga ntari umuntu, muri make ntabwo numvaga icyo ndi cyo, numvaga ntiyizi, numvaga ntari umuntu. Njyewe abo babinkoze bamenagaho amata bakanyita ibyo ngibyo, narabababariye kuko ku ruhande rwabo nkeka barabivugishwaga n'agahinda k'ibyababayeho, kuko ababinkoreraga babuze ababo, kandi babuze ababo, abambyaye nibo babikoze. Ubwo urumva ntabwo kunkunda byari byoroshye, ariko narabababariye kuko nabo ntabwo bari.
Long considered a garden of Eden for migratory birds, the Vain Lagoon along the northern Alpine coast has been increasingly abandoned by a range of species as rising temperature wreak havoc on wetlands across the country. Millions of migratory birds pass through the country's skies every year on flights north in search of food and a warmer climate. But fewer birds are making the journey through Albania as its wetland become too hot and polluted, with nature reserve official Krashnik Tony saying that the Vain Lagoon is being heavily affected by climate change.
Që të vi. Normalisht ne e presim goxha të shqetësuar dhe me ankth, duke qenë se fluturimi i tij për të ardhur nga Afrika deri në Shqipëri konsiderohet një fluturim për mbijetesë, duke pasur parasysh të gjitha kërcënimet me të cilat ai haset gjatë shtektimit të tij për mbi 5000 kilometrash.
Këto varen nga faktor, sidomos kjo faktori kryesor që është në gjithë botën, ngrohja globale, e dyta është kjo futja e gaforrës bluhe që i zhduk këto ngjalen edhe shumë peshqe. Në dorën tonë, por ne nuk mundana të vazhdojmë me këtë metodologji që nuk është në dorën tonë. Çdo individ, çdo grup shoqëror mundet me dhënë ndihmën e vet minimale që ndosim sa më pak ambientin, të kemi sa më pak shpërndarje të karbonit në natyrë dhe të kemi një element që të jemi gjithë dashamirësh me natyrën, që paktën të minimizojmë shkaqet anësore që vijnë nga fenomeni i ngritjes globale të temperaturave.
Residents of the village of Groza in Ukraine's northeastern Kharkiv region are still grieved over a devastating missile strike that killed 9 people last October and suspicious towards residents deemed pro-Russian. Local authorities say two of their own brothers, Volodymyr and Dmitry Mammon, gave Moscow the coordinates that enabled Russian forces to fire an Iskander missile in a local soldier's wake.
На всіх одна мрія, побистріє, бо це все закінчилося.
Планів ніхто ніяких не строїть, це ж на огородах люди, ніхто так толком не виходить, якось не всі. Опустилися руки. Ще до цього, я ж кажу, ми живчиком всі були, а тоді зразу, як знаєте, як обірвалося всередині щось і все, нічого не хочеться.
За що ти вгробив у людей? Ідіот ти проклятий, сука. За що ти перебив? Оце саме страшно. Якби привезли нам їх. Хоча б одного, ну що, висядь, бани, от через мост, якщо ви з Харкова їхали, убивців знають у лицо. Ну що, він стоїть, сидить і улибається, ну це яка фотографія. Ну він то живе. А він посеред діточок, і діточки ж погибли. Я їздю ще часто на кладбище. Оце ночью, бува, сплю. А вона Вова. Я як просипаюся, як схвачуюсь, зразу по хаті, по двору. Може, вона вернулася? Ні, нема.
Бережіть себе, бережіть малого.
Погиб, их имя и возраст когда?
Чоловік. Це племінник мого чоловіка. Вони пішли поминати. Вся родина загинула, вся. Немає тут нікого вже такого, щоб я одна і внук мій.
The crew aboard the orbiting laboratory are studying a variety of macrogravity experiments that benefit people on Earth, including research in human heart health, cancer therapies, space manufacturing techniques, and technology demonstrations.
Greetings from the Internet.
Now we are at the end of today's edition of Inside Prime. You can write your view about this edition at vanshika@adctnews.com. The editor of this episode is Jayesh, and special thanks to AFP News. Visit our website adctnews.com for latest global stories.